And I think that you are personally responsible for spending 22 months propagating atrocity propaganda. You are justifying a genocide, and you will be remembered as such.
I think you'll be remembered too, Frank. I think you'll be remembered very, very clearly.
Welcome back, everyone. Tonight we've got a debate that lit up the airwaves, and trust me, you don't want to miss this one. On Talk TV, British host Peter Codwell walked straight into a verbal storm and got completely dismantled by Barrister Frank McInness. Before we dive into the full story, comment where you're watching from and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now here's why this exchange matters. The subject on the table was Israel and Palestine, one of the most divisive, high-stakes conversations happening anywhere in the world right now. And while most guests tend to tread lightly, Frank did the opposite. He came armed with facts, fire, and moral conviction. He didn't back down for a single second. This wasn't just another TV sparring match. This was a barrister taking on a media figure head-on, refusing to play by the script, and calling out what he saw as propaganda in real time. And here's the thing. Frank hasn't had it easy. He's been criticized by his own peers, shunned by parts of his profession, and dragged for daring to defend Palestinians on national television. But none of that stopped him. If anything, it made him even bolder. What you're about to see is a clash between a journalist who thought he had the upper hand and a barrister who decided he wasn't going to let hollow talking points go unchallenged. And believe me, the way Frank handled this left a mark. Let's get into it.
Oh, good evening, Frank.
Good evening, Peter. It's good to be back. How are you?
Fine, thank you. I just wondered why you believe reasserting their humanity is what Palestinians did on the 7th of October. Why do you believe that's the case, if I'm characterising your words correctly?
Well, the crucial thing to understand is that Israel is governed by fascists, and we know that they're fascist because they tell us that they are. The Israeli finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, has said explicitly that he's a fascist, and it's also the case that Israel's an apartheid state that is engaged in the mass murder of Palestinians.
Okay, let's talk about Hamas. I'm happy to talk about Israel in a second, but in regard to Hamas, you said that Palestinians were reasserting their authority on the 7th of October.
I'm not sure why you're mentioning Hamas. My speech didn't mention Hamas.
Well, you talked about Palestinians there reasserting their humanity on the 7th of October.
Oh, that's interesting. So you just conflated all Palestinians with Hamas.
No, I didn't do that. What I'm saying...
That's
Frank,
the logic of the genocide, isn't it?
Let's have a reasonable conversation, please. The fact is that you said the Palestinians on the 7th of October reasserted their humanity. How do you believe they did that?
It's obviously the case that the fascist apartheid state of Israel herded more than 2 million people into a concentration camp because it views them as a racial threat. And the reason it views them as a racial threat is because they're not Jewish. And so when people find themselves in that situation, it's obviously incompatible with their dignity. No one should be expected to live in those conditions. No one should be told that they're animals. And when you treat people like that, they will always find ways to reassert their humanity and their dignity. So
do you believe that reasserting their humanity was done by running a bulldozer through a fence, flying in on microlights, slaughtering, raping, torturing and kidnapping hundreds of people, not just Israelis, of course, but Thai people, American people, Nepalese people, French people? You believe that's resistance rather than terrorism. Is that correct?
It seems to me that you've chosen to frame this interview in Zionist terms. Is that right?
What I've asked you a reasonable question, and I'm wondering whether you think that's resistance or whether you think that's terrorism or perhaps something else.
Do you think that what you're doing is atrocity propaganda?
I'm the interviewer. I'm asking you the question, and perhaps you would answer the question.
I'm here to suggest that your interview is premised upon extremely racist, anti-Palestinian bigotry, and that you're running cover.
Why do you think that? I mean, is it not the case? Do you believe that it is not the case that a bulldozer went through a fence, that people were raped, tortured, and kidnapped of various nationalities, including Israeli people, but also Nepalese, American, French, and others by Hamas?
The British government is participating in this genocide.
You haven't spoken about Hamas at all, Frank, and you've talked about the British and the Israelis. Why do you keep talking over me? Well, I'd love to, because you're not answering my questions.
I'm here to suggest that you are running atrocity propaganda for a genocide in which your own government is actively participating, and you're doing that because you've chosen to premise this interview on the most disturbing anti-Palestinian racism. Why is it
anti-Palestinian racism to talk about what the terrorist group Hamas did on the 7th of October? Why is that anti-Palestinian racism?
We're 22 months into a genocide that's being enacted by fascists, and you seem to have sided yourself with the fascists. Can you confirm for your viewers that you are in fact anti-fascist and that you oppose the fascists in the apartheid state of Israel as they are engaged in a mass murder of Palestinians?
Frank absolutely owned that exchange. No hesitation, no stumbling, just straight to the point. That's exactly how you deal with loaded, ridiculous questions designed to corner you. Meanwhile, Peter exposed himself right out of the gate. He showed his bias so clearly that you didn't even need to wait for the debate to unfold. The moment he equated all Palestinians with Hamas, his stance became obvious. He wasn't there for balance. He wasn't there for truth. He was there to push a narrative. And that narrative is the same one we've seen over and over again. Justify one side's actions while dehumanizing the other. But Frank didn't let it slide. He countered with something powerful, not just emotion but actual law. He reminded the audience that Palestinians, like any people under occupation, have the legal right to defend themselves. Article 51 of the United Nations Charter makes it clear, when a population is attacked, they are allowed to respond with force, as long as it is necessary and proportionate to repel the assault. Now here's the catch. Palestine doesn't even have the military strength to meet that standard of proportionality. They don't have the tanks, the jets, or the massive arsenals. Yet even without those tools, international law recognizes their right to resist. And that's what Frank was laying out. Not some abstract theory, but the cold reality of a people cornered, stripped of options, and still entitled to defend themselves. What Peter tried to frame as terrorism or excuses was instead exposed for what it really is, a fundamental human right to survival. And Frank, by holding his ground, made that clear to everyone watching.
Well, I'm here to suggest that Palestinians have a right to use armed force to resist the apartheid state that is committing a genocide against them. That's clear as a matter of international law, but it's not just law. We have to think about how you actually stop a genocide. Think about the most, perhaps,
So are you then saying that what happened on the 7th of October is justified?
Well, you interrupted me again. What I was saying was that the way that you stop a genocide is with military force. And so I'm here to suggest that everyone should be loudly proclaiming their support for the Palestinian right to use armed force to attack the army that's committing a genocide against them. It's also the case that Palestinians should be supported whenever they choose to pursue whatever strategy they want to liberate themselves from the occupation.
I don't think you're answering my questions, Frank. And as a barrister, you will know that in court you ask a witness a question and then they answer it. I just don't think you're answering them. Maybe I'll try another.
Hold on. I'm not your witness.
I didn't say you were. I'm simply saying you'll be familiar with the concept of an interview. Usually I ask a question. Usually you will give me an answer. I think it's a reasonable. Sorry, go ahead.
Your questions are extremely racist against Palestinians.
How? You haven't told me how.
You're running cover for a genocide of Palestinians that's happening as you and I are speaking, and that specifically is targeting your colleagues in the journalism profession. Hundreds of your colleagues in Palestine are being murdered because they are. 237 journalists last time I counted. Your colleague Anas al-Sharif was murdered by the fascist apartheid state of Israel. You have nothing to say about it.
That is another matter. What I would, and I'm the one doing the interview. I'm the one doing the interview. I've broadcast about that previously, and my opinions on that are on the record. In regard to resistance versus terrorism, would you argue, or would you say that what happened with the jihadists on the 7th on 7/7 on the 2005 was resistance or terrorism?
The term terrorism may have some use as a matter of politics. As a matter of law, it should be abolished. The Terrorism Act 2000 is in a legitimacy crisis because it keeps being used by the administrators of the British Empire as they commit this genocide to try and attack and suppress speech that criticises them as they do that, right? Let's be clear that your government, the British government...
So I've given you the opportunity to say that the jihadists who committed 7/7 are terrorists. You've said that you've not taken that opportunity. Let me try another one. The Manchester bomber who murdered people, including children, would you call him a terrorist?
You're a disgrace to your profession and you're extremely racist.
I'm asking perfectly reasonable questions which you haven't answered.
No, you're not. You're running atrocity propaganda 22 months into a genocide.
Well, why have you decided to do this interview then, Frank?
I was hoping that you might have some integrity and admit that you made a terrible mistake by embracing the fascist ideology of Zionism and agreeing to apologise to the people of Palestine for embracing.
So speaking of integrity, you're someone who...
You just don't let me finish. You call yourself a journalist. You don't let me talk. It's ridiculous.
You call yourself a barrister. Plenty of people say that you are someone who should apologise to the woman who had family members die on the 7th of October, who you called a Zionist wretch. You also tweeted, "We're going to effing destroy an Israeli arms manufacturer." Would you like to apologise for that?
You're talking about Elbit Systems UK Limited, which is...
Well, let's talk about the woman you called a Zionist wretch whose family members died on the 7th of October.
I'm not about to talk about that. I do want to talk about what you just raised.
Why not?
Because I'll choose how to answer your questions. Are you going to let me answer?
Well, I'd like you to answer the question about the woman you called a Zionist wretch and why you did that.
Yeah, and I've explained I'm not going to talk about that.
Why
but I
not?
will talk about...
Why are you not going to talk about it? Why will you not apologise to her?
I'm not going to have you spring these questions on me.
I'm not springing the questions. That is something that you're perfectly aware of. That is something that has been a matter of public controversy. You're a controversial barrister. I have been contacted today by a number of members of your profession who say that you, in their view, are not upholding the standards of your profession. What do you make of that?
I came here to talk about the genocide of Palestinians, which is happening as you and I are speaking, and which the company Elbit Systems UK Limited, which I was talking about in the tweet you referenced, that's a subsidiary of an Israeli company. It's a company that Palestine Action existed to attack and defeat, and it's an integral part of the Israeli government's apartheid regime, which, as I've said, is currently governed by fascists. I'm here to suggest that the ideology of Zionism is an inherently racist ideology, and it's a fascist one, and that the time has come for everyone to have the courage to do what Zara Sultana MP did and admit that anyone who embraced Zionism made a terrible mistake, that they were endorsing the logic of the mass murder of Palestinians because they're viewed as a racial threat to the demographic purity of Israel's apartheid state, and that we have to admit that the time has come for us to turn our back as the human family on that fascist ideology, to side unequivocally with the Palestinians as they liberate themselves from that apartheid state as a genocide.
Okay, so you're...
Let's step back and look at the sheer scale of what's happened. We're not talking about vague numbers here. We're talking about lives. Since October 7th, more than 270 journalists have been killed. These are people whose only crime was trying to document the truth. Over 170 United Nations aid workers have lost their lives, the very people sent in to provide food, medicine and shelter in the middle of a war zone. More than 1,400 healthcare workers have been killed, doctors, nurses, paramedics, those who run toward danger when everyone else runs away. And then there's the most heartbreaking number of all. According to UNICEF, over 50,000 children have been killed. That's not just a statistic, that's entire schools, playgrounds and neighborhoods wiped out. Its futures erased before they even began. And yet, in the middle of all this devastation, we see Peter sitting across from Frank, defending Israel's actions with a straight face. No acknowledgement of the human cost, no recognition of the scale of suffering, just the same talking points, the same excuses. That's why Frank's words cut so deep. He called Peter a disgrace, not just as a journalist, but as a human being. And let's be real, it's hard to argue with that when you look at how little empathy is shown for such overwhelming loss of life. But here's the hypocrisy that makes it even worse. Peter demands that every single discussion about Israel and Palestine begin with condemning Hamas. Yet has he once, even once, used his platform to condemn the actions of Israel? Not in this debate, not in his previous debates, not at all. And that silence speaks louder than any argument he could ever make.
You're saying that we should side ourselves unequivocally with the Palestinians. Does that say that we should... does that mean, in your view, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Frank, but does that mean, in your view, that we should side ourselves unequivocally with Hamas?
There is a distinction in international law between what's called jus ad bellum and jus in bello, right? The reason for the war and the conduct of the war. I think that what's absolutely clear is that Palestinians have a right to engage in armed struggle against an apartheid state while it tries to destroy them. I'm obviously not here to start falling into the traps you're trying to set regarding the Terrorism Act 2000.
They're not traps, they're perfectly ordinary questions.
Yeah, it's just that one side of this debate has to be very careful about what it says because it might commit a criminal offence, while the other one gets to go on a platform and spout genocide, denial and atrocity propaganda for months and faces no consequences, right? That's the imbalance that the British state that's participating in this genocide has deliberately created. And I'm inviting you to have some courage to challenge the British state instead of engaging in this continued anti-Palestinian racism. It's a genocide, mate. Like, seriously, like, how have you allowed yourself to become so numb to that? Have you lost all humanity? Like, seriously?
I would argue, Frank, well, you're asking me a question, I want to put it back to you. I would argue that to be a humanitarian, what you would do right now is say that what Hamas did on the 7th of October was a lack of humanity, was a horrible, evil act that should not have happened. I would also challenge you to say that any anti-Semitism that happens in this country, including some that you have been accused of by others, should be completely condemned.
You want to be very careful. It's not been shown that I've done anything anti-Semitic.
I haven't said that either. I have said that you've been accused of it.
It's as I've said. You are currently choosing to side with the British government while it commits a genocide. I'm inviting you to do something far more courageous, to admit that you made a mistake by embracing the fascist ideology of Zionism, to apologise to the people of Palestine, and to come out like Zara Sultana did as an anti-Zionist. It's beyond urgent. It's 22 months into a genocide, and you're still talking about October when it started, October 2023. Do you not
think we should talk about it? Do you think we should not talk about the 7th of October?
I think that the 7th of October is being used as atrocity propaganda, and I think that you are personally responsible for spending 22 months propagating atrocity propaganda. You are justifying a genocide, and you will be remembered as such.
I think you'll be remembered too, Frank. I think you'll be remembered.
And in the end, Frank left us with words that cut right to the core. He looked across that table and said it plainly. It's a genocide, mate. How have you allowed yourself to become so numb to that? Think about that for a second. We live in a world where endless streams of headlines, sound bites, and political spin have desensitized people to the point where mass suffering barely registers anymore. Frank's challenge wasn't just directed at Peter, it was directed at all of us. How much do we let slide before we finally say enough is enough? These weren't just talking points in a TV studio. They were a reminder that behind every statistic are real lives, and behind every deflection is a deliberate attempt to numb us into silence. And Frank refused to let that silence win. So as the dust settles on this debate, one thing is clear. Peter may have walked in thinking he had control, but Frank left the stronger voice, and his words will resonate long after the cameras stopped rolling. Until next time, this has been The Whip Line. Thanks for tuning in.